Night wind in Colorado knows how to cut through flesh without raising its voice. It slips through the black lines of pine, moves along the narrow roads of Gold Creek like a quiet warning. That night, when the Briggs's door shut with a sharp pull, the sound stayed in Nalaya's mind longer than the wind itself. She stood still on the porch, her breath turning into white mist, her arms wrapped around a thin, faded coat worn through many winters when her father was still alive. "Don't come back," her stepmother's voice said behind the wooden door, dry and cold as the storm outside. No explanation, no hesitation. Nalaya looked up at the dull gray sky, dropping snowflakes sharp as salt. She was only 19, too young to accept this kind of cruelty, but life had never favored girls who had no one to shield them. She stepped down the porch. Wind lifted a thin layer of snow onto her ankles. Behind her, the house dimmed quickly, as if it too wanted to shake her off. Gold Creek in winter looked like the ghost of itself. Kerosene lamps flickered in the wind, bright without warmth, dim without darkness. Every window was shut tight, wooden walls trembling under each lash of wind. Nalaya pulled her coat closer, hiding her shaking hands in its pockets. Cold found its way through every seam like fine needles, sinking into skin, sinking deeper into fear. She had nowhere to go. Mabel, her closest friend, lived on the far end of town, a dangerous walk in a storm. The church had gone dark early. All she could do was keep moving, hoping her body knew how to survive better than her frightened heart. But the wind grew fierce. Snow thickened. Streets vanished under white. In moments, she no longer recognized where she was. Only the crying sound of the storm stayed with her. Her shoes soaked through. Cold climbed past her knees. Her breathing weighed like stone. She kept walking, each step too far, as if the ground kept shifting away from her. "Just a little more," she whispered. But the wind swallowed her voice whole. A hard gust hit. Nalaya staggered, then fell to her knees. Snow pierced her skin like blades. Her vision blurred. She tried to stand, but her body refused. Everything curled into a white haze. When she collapsed, snow took her in with its ruthless cold, covering her drenched curls, settling on the lashes closing over her eyes. In the last flicker of awareness, she thought she heard a horse, or maybe it was only the faint, uneven beat of her own heart. Cain Mercer had no wish to be on this road after nightfall. But the ranch had run out of flour and iron nails, things no mountain winter forgives, so he rode into town before the storm broke. No one expected the storm to arrive this fast. Wind cut his face, cold enough to numb thought. Thunder, his horse, snorted hard and pushed through the heavy snow. Cain leaned close, both to shield himself and to steady the loyal animal. "Just a little more," he muttered. Then thunder stopped, ears pricked. Cain narrowed his eyes, trying to see through the white wall ahead. Something was there, a small, dark shape swallowed by snow. He dismounted without delay. Snow burst around his boots. He knelt beside the shape, and his heart tightened. A girl. Young. Skin warm brown like wet walnut. Curls frozen stiff. Lips blue. Breath so faint he had to bend down to feel it at all. "Can you hear me?" His voice was low, rough from the cold. No answer. Cain clenched his jaw and draped his thick buffalo hide coat over her. When he lifted her, her body felt light, as if already drifting away from the world. His cheek brushed her hair, cold enough to hurt, and he bent closer, sheltering her from the wind, holding her firmly against him. He set her before the saddle, one arm around her waist. Even in her unconsciousness, something real moved through him, a quiet sense that his life had just turned. "You're all right," he whispered, steady as stone. "Don't give up. I'm taking you home." Thunder charged back into the storm, and Cain held the unknown girl as if fate itself had placed her life in his hands. Nalaya woke because of warmth, a kind of warmth so unfamiliar she thought she must be dreaming. Colorado nights were never warm like this, not after she had fallen in the white field. Her eyelids felt heavy. She blinked a few times before they finally opened. The first thing she saw was the orange-gold fire shifting in the stove. That soft light touched the rough wooden walls, the small table scarred by saw marks, the thick leather coat hanging near the hearth to dry. The scent of burning wood drifted through the room, mixed with earth and melting snow. She lay on a narrow bed under thick, layered blankets kept too neat for this to be a house with a woman in it. A shiver traced down her spine. Then she realized something worse. Her body was bare beneath the covers, not a single piece of clothing. Panic surged. She sat up fast, pulling the blanket tight to her. A chair scraped softly. A low voice rose from the corner. "Easy. You're safe." Nalaya snapped her gaze toward the sound. A man stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, still as an old pine on a mountainside. He did not step closer. He held his hands slightly raised, showing he meant no harm. Her eyes adjusted. She saw him more clearly. Dark brown hair mussed by wind, gray-blue eyes like a winter sky, a strong jaw without harshness. And most of all, nothing in his bearing suggested danger, only the careful tension of a man trying to act rightly. "Why? Why am I not wearing anything?" Her voice was hoarse, thick with fear and embarrassment. Cain Mercer drew a slow breath, as if preparing for something difficult. "Your clothes were soaked through. If you kept them on, you wouldn't have survived the night." He lowered his head, speaking slow and plain. "I did only what was needed to keep you alive. I looked away as much as a man can. You have my word." His voice held no defense, no urgency, only a steady sincerity that made her heartbeat stumble not from fear but from shyness. She held the blanket tighter, but the panic eased. She knew what a dangerous gaze looked like, and the one before her was not it. Cain walked toward the stove. "You'll warm quicker with something hot to drink." "I won't look." He held out a wooden cup, steam rising from it. Nalaya reached for it, but the heavy blanket tangled her arm. Cain stepped forward. Not close, just enough to help. When his fingertips brushed hers, she flinched, as if the fire had sent a spark across the room. Cain withdrew at once, eyes shifting away. "Sorry, my hands are cold." "It's all right," she whispered, avoiding the fire reflected in his eyes. That small moment, brief as the snap of wood in the stove, left an echo soft as touching new snow. She drank a sip of the hot water. Her throat burned, then warmed. She looked around, searching for any sign of where she was. "This is your home?" Cain nodded. "Mercer Ranch, a good distance from Gold Creek. I found you on the way back." "How long was I unconscious?" "Close to 3 hours." A pause. "Another half hour, and there would have been nothing I could do." She clutched the blanket. The thought tightened her chest. She remembered the storm, the wind, the cold earth, the darkness ready to swallow her. But then she remembered arms lifting her, breath near her ear, the scent of leather, and the steady rhythm of a stranger's heartbeat in the blizzard. She swallowed. You saved me. Cain gave a small shrug, eyes sliding away, as if saving a life was an ordinary thing for him. In a storm like that, no one leaves anyone behind. Silence followed, not the fearful kind, but the kind shared by two strangers trying to understand whether fate had meant for them to meet. Nalaya watched him, cautious but no longer defensive. Cain kept his eyes on the fire, though they flicked toward her from time to time, quick, quiet, as if he feared making her uneasy. Outside, the storm still howled, but in that small cabin, warmth spread gently, like an unseen hand settling over two unsteady hearts. They did not trust each other, not yet, but the presence of the other eased the storm inside them, just a little. And sometimes, a little is enough to change an entire life. That night, the storm did not stop. Wind screamed through the cracks as if trying to tear the small cabin apart. Snow struck the wooden walls in steady blows like a drum. Nalaya lay still, blanket pulled tight around her, listening to those sounds without the fear she had felt before, because she knew she was not alone. Cain sat with his back against the wall near the stove, long legs stretched out, his old coat draped across his thighs. He had tried to sleep in the chair, but it was too stiff, and sleep had finally taken him where he sat. Nalaya turned her face toward him, not daring to stare yet unable to look away. Firelight cast gold across the straight line of his nose, the thick lashes resting on his cheek, the shadow drawn long behind him. Each breath he took was slow and steady, his chest rising beneath the coarse wool shirt. She could hear that breath, clear enough that it felt as if the cabin itself was keeping pace with the stranger beside her. By morning, when she opened her eyes, the wind still hadn't eased. The window was a blur of white. Nothing suggested the weather would change. She pulled the blanket closer, warm and strange. A part of her was grateful the storm held her here a little longer, though she would never admit it. Cain was adding wood to the fire. The flame brightened, lighting the rolled sleeves of his shirt. His arms were strong, shaped by hard work, yet his movements were slow and careful, as if he wanted to avoid startling her. "Sleep any?" Cain asked without turning. His voice wasn't loud, yet something in it lifted a corner of the cold from the room. "A little," Nalaya answered, shy of meeting his eyes. Cain glanced her way, then picked up the coat drying on the chair. "If you feel steady, you can wear this for now. I'll leave it here when you're ready." He set it at the edge of the bed, never stepping too close. A quiet respect. When she reached out from beneath the blanket, Cain paused. Her hands, slender, brown, knuckles slightly swollen from cold. They trembled. His gaze stayed on them longer than needed. Not from curiosity, not from desire, but as if he saw something she didn't speak aloud. This girl had endured more than most would guess. Nalaya drew her hand back by instinct. Warmth rose in her chest, as if that look had touched something deep. The second day, the storm held on. Their breakfast was simple. Corn cakes Cain had made before the weather turned, with a little honey he had brought from town. Nalaya ate slowly, each bite drawing heat into her body. Cain watched her with no pressure, no questions, quiet as the mountains. And that quietness made her feel safe. When she set her plate down, he asked, "Nalaya Briggs, that's a fine name. Does it mean something?" She startled. Few asked her name with gentleness. "It was my mother's doing. She named me. Said it meant light of dawn." I don't know if that's true. Cain gave a faint smile, rare, small, honest. It fits, he said. You seem like someone who doesn't let the dark take too much. She lowered her gaze. His words brushed a place she wasn't used to letting anyone reach. Then her turn. And Cain Mercer? Mercer. Were they homesteaders from the East? Yes. My father came to Colorado when I was young. The family. It's only me now. His voice hesitated after the word family, as if another wind had passed through his chest. Nalaya studied him, seeing behind the calm for the first time, an emptiness. You lost someone? She asked softly. Parents, and my younger brother. Winter accident. Storm like this. Cain's eyes lifted to the window, heavy. Since then, I live alone. Nalaya kept quiet. Not because she lacked words, but because in his loneliness she saw her own reflection. They didn't touch. They didn't move closer. But something shifted between two hearts. On the third day, when Cain opened the door to check the storm, the wind hit so hard he had to brace against it. Snow reached his knees, white enough he had to squint. No traveling yet, he said. Nalaya nodded, unsure if it was relief or fear. That entire day, they stayed inside, cooking a simple soup together, drying clothes, sitting near the fire. Not many words, but every word landed true. When Cain fell asleep on the long chair from exhaustion, Nalaya watched him. His breath rose evenly. A lock of hair, had fallen across his brow. His hand rested beside him, the same hand that had carried her through the storm. She wrapped the blanket closer. The warmth of the cabin held her, and for the first time in months, she did not feel suspended in the world. The quiet strength of that stranger had steadied her heart. In those 3 days, snowed in by the fiercest storm Colorado had seen, a small seed of something deeper began to push through, unhurried, patient, but sure. On the 4th morning, when the storm finally pulled away from the ridge, Gold Creek appeared under snow piled halfway up the calf. Weak sunlight pushed through gray clouds, casting a pale sheen across the ground, as if the town had woken from a long sleep. Nalaya stood by the window, looking out at it with a tight ache in her chest. This was the place she was born, yet no place here belonged to her. Cain sat at the table, fastening the straps of his saddle. He glanced at her, at the face trying to stay strong, though not strong enough to hide the turmoil beneath. "Do you want me to take you back into town?" he asked, voice low and steady as always. Nalaya nodded. "I need to find work and see Mabel. She might let me stay a few nights." She tried to keep her voice even, but her throat was dry. Cain heard the faint tremor at the end of her words. He said nothing more. Gold Creek after the storm was busier than usual. Folks clearing snow, folks checking the damage. Cain stopped the horse in front of Caldwell's store. The old man was shoveling the steps, but when he saw Nalaya climb down from Cain's horse, something flickered in his eyes. Not quite unkind, but edged with caution. "Morning, Mr. Caldwell," Nalaya said, steadying her voice. "I'm looking for work. Anything you need done." He hesitated, then shook his head. "It's not that I don't want to help, but you know how customers are these days. And after a storm, I can't afford extra hands. Sorry." Nalaya bowed her head slightly. A cold spread through her chest. Not the cold of snow, but the cold people reserve for one another. She tried 2 more places, Mrs. Ralston's sewing shop, then the Murray's diner. Each response was the same: soft apologies, drifting eyes, and refusals wrapped in reasons that sounded reasonable but were rooted in judgment. Cain stood a few steps back, neither interfering nor speaking, only watching. But every time someone shook their head and Nalaya's shoulders dipped, Cain's jaw tightened a little more, as if he himself had been turned away. When the diner door shut behind her for the last time, the wind caught her scarf. She stood still, eyes lowered to her snow-stained boots. Cain stepped closer, not too close, but close enough that his warmth brushed her shoulder. "It isn't your fault," he said quietly. Nalaya drew a deep breath, swallowing bitterness. "I just need a job. I don't want to depend on anyone." Cain looked at her, his gray eyes heavy as storm clouds, yet warm in the way only a quiet man could be. "You won't depend on anyone," he said. "You'll work, earn pay, same as anyone." She looked up, uncertain. Cain went on slower. "If you want, you can stay at the ranch. I need help. Cooking, tending chickens, cleaning stalls, garden work in spring. Not light work, but I believe you can do it." The offer held no trace of charity, no weight of pity. It was as plain and grounded as the way he tied a rein or placed wood on the fire. Steady, practical, uncomplicated. But to Nalaya, it felt like the only bridge across a deep drop. "You truly want to hire me?" she asked, voice soft as falling snow. Cain nodded. "Your room would be in the main cabin. I'll move to the bunkhouse. No talk in town will trouble you." A rare, careful thoroughness, the kind decent men show without being asked. Nalaya looked down at her hands, hands that 3 days earlier had curled stiff with cold, now shaking with a fragile relief she barely dared to breathe. "Cain, I don't know what to say." "Just say yes or no," he answered, voice lower than usual. She pressed her lips together, lifted her eyes to him one more time. "I say yes." Cain let out a breath, so light someone else might mistake it for wind. But Nalaya saw, and she knew he was holding something inside as well. He opened the pack behind the saddle and took out the thick, fur-lined coat he had readied that morning. "This is for you. You'll need better warmth at the ranch." He held it out to her. When Nalaya reached to take it, their fingers touched. Just a small point of contact, slight as a thread of spark cutting through winter's weight. Nalaya flinched a little. So did Cain. He pulled back a fraction, eyes shifting away. The moment was brief, but it was enough for both of them to understand. The snow had stopped falling, but something else, warmer, more dangerous, had begun to stir between them. Colorado's late winter sun usually rose slow, but that morning, soft light had already slipped through the cabin curtain when Nalaya woke. No more howl of a blizzard, no fear of being turned away. Only the scent of smoldering pine and a quiet so still she could hear a rooster calling from far across the valley. Cain Mercer's ranch was larger than she had imagined. Not grand, not busy, just stretches of pale gold land in the valley, a small horse barn, 2 sheds, and the wooden cabin Cain had repaired by hand winter after winter. Nalaya stepped onto the porch and saw him several paces away, hat low, checking Thunder's saddle and reins. He didn't look her way, yet somehow he knew she stood there. A strange silence hung between them. Not awkward, but a kind of understanding not yet named. "You're up early," Cain said, eyes still on the leather straps. "The ranch woke me," Nalaya answered softly. "I'm not used to this kind of quiet." Cain gave a faint smile, thin as a crack on ice, rare but warm. The first day's work wasn't hard, but to Nalaya it opened an entirely new world. Cain showed her how to scatter feed for the chickens, check the water trough, gather dry straw for the horses at night. He spoke only what she needed to know, his voice even and low, as if too many words might unsettle her. "You want to learn to ride astride?" he asked, bringing out the gentlest mare. "I want to learn everything," Nalaya said, lifting her chin with quiet resolve. "I don't want to be someone who only stands aside." Cain looked at her a heartbeat longer, not surprised, not doubtful, but as if he saw something in her she hadn't yet seen herself. "All right," he said, "but slow. This saddle's slick, and the cold makes it easy to slip." Nalaya set her boot in the stirrup, a slight tremor in her leg. Cain stood close, one hand on the reins, the other resting lightly on her calf to guide her. The moment he touched her, brief as it was, Nalaya drew a sharp breath, warmth slipping through layers of winter fabric. "Easy," Cain murmured, voice low enough it felt meant for her alone. "Let the saddle take you. Don't tense." I'm trying," she whispered. He placed his hand over hers to adjust her grip. His hand was large, warm, rough-edged, but steady. Their thumbs brushed, so small a touch any other person would miss it, except the two standing in the dim morning light. Cain pulled his hand back quickly. Nalaya bowed her head, hiding the faint flush rising in her cheeks. Neither said another word. At noon, they ate together. Bread, salted meat, and coffee, simple but warm in a way she couldn't name. Cain wasn't a talker, but each time his eyes met hers, both looked away almost at once, not fast enough to deny it, but slow enough for their hearts to hear something shift. By afternoon, Nalaya helped clean the stalls. She tied her hair back, sleeves rolled, skin damp with sweat, though the air stayed cold. Cain worked a doorway away, but his gaze drifted toward her at times, not watching her, but making sure she wasn't pushing too hard. When she glanced up, she caught him. Cain turned away immediately, but not quickly enough. She had seen the warmth in his eyes, and she knew he had seen something in hers. At day's end, they stood beside the open barn together. Cold wind carried the scent of half-melted snow. Nalaya folded her arms, shivering. Without a word, Cain took off his scarf and stepped closer. "Wear this," he said, voice rough from the day's work. He wrapped the scarf around her neck. When his hand brushed the back of her neck, unintended, just part of the motion, Nalaya froze. She felt his breath pause. The entire ranch seemed to hold still with them. "Thank you," she said, voice smaller than usual. Cain stepped back, as if distance was needed to keep everything steady. But distance only made things clearer. Nalaya knew she was walking into the most dangerous part of the heart, the place she had promised never to return. And Cain, he knew he should keep space between them, yet he didn't leave the yard until she walked inside the cabin and closed the door behind her. That night, as Nalaya blew out the lamp, she heard the wind outside but felt no cold. And Cain, he stood a long time beside Thunder, hand on the horse's muzzle, staring toward the cabin where the light had gone out. He tried not to think too much, but the quiet around him was too full and too warm to deny what was growing. They hadn't spoken a word of it. Yet both felt it clearly. Another storm, no snow this time but feeling, was rising, and neither was sure they wanted to run from it. Late spring dusk faded into a pale violet sky, and Cain's ranch was quieter than usual. Nalaya had grown used to its rhythm, the hens scratching, grass brushing under hooves, wind scraping past the windows. Yet today, what unsettled her was Cain's long absence. He had ridden into town early, saying he would help reinforce a few roofs damaged by last week's wind. By the time darkness settled, he still had not returned. Her worry deepened by the hour. It wasn't fear of losing shelter or support. This was the fear of losing someone who had, without her noticing, become part of her. She stood at the door, eyes fixed on the pale road under the crescent moon. Cold wind loosened her scarf, but she didn't care. Then came hoofbeats, slow, heavy, uneven. A figure emerged from the dark. Cain, but not steady as always. He dismounted with effort, his leg giving slightly. Cain! Nalaya rushed to him, forgetting the careful distance they kept. She took his arm, feeling his weight lean into her more than she expected. One side of his coat was singed, smoke and char clinging to his hair. "I'm all right," he exhaled, trying to straighten. "Just hit a roof beam, hauling someone out." "All right, nothing," Nalaya muttered, voice unsteady. "Inside. Now." She guided him into the cabin and shut the door against the night wind. Cain sat heavily, too tired to argue. When Nalaya bent to inspect the gash along his shoulder, skin torn, dried blood, she held her breath. She had never been this close to him, and her heartbeat had never thundered this way. She heated water, washed her hands, then knelt beside him with a bowl of warm water and a clean cloth. Cain's face in the firelight looked softer. No rigid restraint, only weariness and a strange surrender. "Does it hurt much?" she asked quietly. "I can take it." "I asked if it hurts, not whether you can take it." Cain let out a rough, tired laugh. "A little." She pressed the warm cloth to the wound. Cain's hand tightened on the chair, she noticed, but he didn't flinch or pull back. Nalaya eased her touch. "You helped many people?" she asked, trying to keep him alert. "A few kids, trapped behind a counter. I pulled them out. Nothing more." Nalaya paused. "Nothing more?" "Cain, that's saving lives." He said nothing. But when she looked up, his eyes met hers. A long look. A very long one. Neither turned away. Her hand still rested on his shoulder, warm, light, unsteady. Cain lifted his hand and closed it gently around her wrist. A small gesture, yet enough to undo her defenses, enough to change the rhythm of his breathing. Slower, deeper, as if trying to hold on to that moment. "Nalaya." He said her name for the first time in a tone so soft, she drew a deep breath. She sat a little lower, closer. Cain leaned toward her too, perhaps from pain or something stronger. "You shouldn't scare me like that," she whispered. Cain watched her, a beat longer, then spoke so quietly it seemed he feared breaking whatever was growing between them. "I'm sorry for making you afraid." Their distance now was no more than a breath. The first touch came slowly, Cain's hand lifting to her cheek, as if asking for permission. She leaned into his palm in answer, and he bent toward her. The first kiss was not rushed. It was light, like spring air touching the ground after a long winter. Warm, careful, shaped by two people who knew this would change everything. But when Nalaya's arms slipped around his shoulders, when Cain drew her closer, all restraint dissolved. That night, in the soft gold of the fire, they moved toward each other like two halves of a story waiting since the storm first placed her in his arms. No urgency, no flourish. Just two people, two breaths folding into one, finding the warmth both had lacked for years. A night quiet. Still. True. At dawn, when the first line of sunlight slipped through the window, Nalaya opened her eyes. She lay in Cain's arms, her head on his chest, his arm around her waist, as if he had held her all night. When she shifted, Cain woke, and they both stopped. Not in regret, not in shame. Just unsure what to call this. Cain rose first, slow, as if anything sudden might break something fragile. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice softer than usual. She nodded, a faint curve at her lips, her heart unsteady. "And you?" He looked at her, then at his own hands, the hands that had held her through the night, and answered in a single line that made her chest tighten. "I've never let myself be this close to anyone." Silence settled, not uneasy, but full of everything neither dared say. The only certain truth was, there was no returning to the way things had been, and they both knew it. Rumors in Gold Creek didn't need wind to travel. One glance of someone seeing Cain and Nalaya at the morning market, one word about him stopping by the clinic for antiseptic, and the whole town was murmuring before the sun reached the ridge. Nalaya Briggs is living in Cain Mercer's cabin. Bold for someone her age. That brown-skinned girl, bet she's clinging to a man for shelter. Strange fellow, that Mercer. All the white women wanting him, and he ties himself to a girl like her. The whispers weren't only cruel. They seeped into the air itself, into every corner Nalaya walked through. That morning, when she stepped into Caldwell's store for flour, two women near the salt shelf turned away, whispering as if she carried danger. One gave her a sharp, disdainful glance. "Strange times," the woman said loudly. "A colored girl bold enough to move into a single man's house." The other scoffed. "Bold comes easy to women like that." Nalaya stopped, fingers whitening around the flour tin. Her heart tightened like someone pressing hard into it. She said nothing, because words were useless. She bowed her head and walked out. Cain waited outside, holding the reins. He saw the color drained from her face, her breath thin. "What happened?" he asked at once. "Nothing." Nalaya tried to smile, but the attempt only loosened tears in her eyes. Cain touched her elbow lightly, a gesture he always kept careful yet warm. "Nalaya," she shook her head. "It's fine. Let's go back." He looked at her, eyes heavy. He knew she was hiding something, and that helplessness, the thing he hated most, pressed into him. But Gold Creek didn't stop at whispers. That afternoon, when Nalaya brought eggs to Mrs. Murray, who had always been kind, her son blocked the doorway. "Ma's busy," he said, cold. "I just wanted to bring no need. And don't come again." The door slammed. Nalaya stood there, wind slipping down her collar. The rejection wasn't Mrs. Murray's. It was the town deciding for her. Her story had been twisted into something warped, and people now saw her through whatever lens they chose to believe. She walked back to the ranch in silence. Cain saw her the moment she crossed the yard. He dropped the fence post he was hammering and went straight to her. "What now?" His voice was low, tight. Nalaya meant to say nothing, but her throat closed. She only breathed, faintly. "Cain, people are talking about me. A lot." His jaw clenched. "I'll talk to them." "No." She grabbed his hand before he could turn. Their fingers interlaced for a heartbeat, unintentional, but storm-like. If you do that, they'll say you're defending me because of that night. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You'll be the one paying the price. I don't want that for you. Cain looked at her hand on his, warm, trembling, real. You think I care about what they say? His voice roughened. The word you had slipped out, soft, dangerous. Nalaya felt her heart falter, but she shook her head, clinging to what little reason she had left. Cain, I can't stay if every day they look at me like I'm something wrong. You need someone who doesn't bring trouble. Don't say that, Cain cut in, voice held down like he feared it might break. She looked at him. For the first time since they met, Cain showed everything. Fear, helpless anger, the ache of not being able to protect her. Nalaya, I'm afraid of losing you. His voice cracked into a confession he hadn't meant to speak. She froze. Her dark eyes shimmered like wind-touched lake water. Cain, I know. She spoke slowly, tight, honest. But that's why I have to leave. If I stay, they'll turn their arrows on you. Cain tightened his grip on her hand. You think I want to go back to that empty house each night without seeing you? Nalaya closed her eyes. 1 second. In that single second, she knew. Whatever she felt for him was no longer something she could hide. But she also knew. Feelings alone couldn't fight a whole town's prejudice. She drew her hand from his. Cain didn't stop her, but his hand trembled. I need a few days to think, Nalaya said, voice too soft for the pain twisting inside her. Cain stood still, his arm falling to his side. You won't leave, he said. But it wasn't a statement. It was a plea disguised as one. Nalaya turned and went into the cabin. Her steps were light, yet each one seemed to pull breath from Cain's chest. Night fell quickly, and for the first time since the blizzard had passed, they slept in separate spaces, sharing the same fear, that by morning they might no longer belong to each other. Spring festival in Gold Creek always came earlier than the season itself. While wildflowers were still timid under damp soil, lanterns were strung across the square, long tables set out, fiddles tuned, drums tested. Folks treated it as proof the town still had warmth left after a hard winter. Nalaya hadn't planned to go. After all the whispering, she wanted nothing more than to stay at the ranch, away from every pair of eyes. But Cain stood at her cabin door in a crisp shirt, gaze steady and firm as the granite ridge. Nalaya, he said, not insisting, but resolute. Tonight, you're coming with me. She looked up, unsure. Cain, let them talk, he cut in calm. I won't let you face it alone. His words weren't a promise. They were a kind of protection that didn't need to be loud. And Nalaya knew. Refusing him now would wound the man who had stood by her, even in silence. So she nodded. When they reached the square, Cain dismounted first, then lifted a hand to help her down. His hand, warm, broad, steady, gave her the sense she had caught hold of something solid in a place filled with sharp, judging eyes. Music rose, bright fiddle, light drums, the cheerful voices of the mine boys. Cain held out his hand. Nalaya Briggs, he said, voice soft as night air. Will you dance with me? She placed her hand in his, her palm warm and burning, and the square seemed to shift around them. They danced the first slow tune of the night. With Cain's sure steps and his hand at her back, Nalaya felt guided away from every cruel glance. His arms were broad, warm, sure, enough to make her believe nothing could strike through. But the world was harsher than that. A voice sharp as winter wind cut along the edge of the dance floor. Well, isn't that something? Cain stilled. Nalaya froze. Cold swept through her, not from weather, but from the woman standing there. Stepmother. Eleanor Briggs stood with arms folded, lips curled in a pleased, bitter smile. Beside her were Mrs. Ralston and Cynthia Byrne, the two loudest gossipers in Gold Creek. "Look at her," Eleanor said with a low laugh. "All those years I housed her, and she turns out to be the kind who settles into any man's home she can." A hiss spread across the crowd. Faces turned. Nalaya went still. Weeks of whispering collapsed onto her like an avalanche. Cynthia Byrne added her poison. "Cain, what about the Mercer name? A girl like her on your arm? You think it makes you look noble?" Cain let go of Nalaya's hand, not abandoning her, but to step forward, placing himself between her and the crowd. "I think," he said, slow and deep enough to hush the square, "if there's anyone who should be ashamed here, it isn't Nalaya Briggs." "Oh?" Eleanor narrowed her eyes. "And why defend her? Because she lives in your house for free? Or because she—" "Enough." Cain spoke one word, not loud, but sharp as an axe. The murmurs swelled, yet Cain didn't turn. He kept his eyes on Eleanor. "Nalaya works harder, straighter, and kinder than many who speak behind her back." His voice dropped, each word hitting the ground like weight. "If you insult her again, I won't stand aside." Eleanor flushed with rage. She looked at Nalaya as if ready to tear her in two. "You're the disgrace of the Briggs name." Each word struck Nalaya like a blade. She stepped back, then another step. Even with Cain standing in front of her, she felt exposed, alone. No one spoke for her. No one offered kindness. Only Cain, one man standing against an entire town. And that hurt her more than the insult itself. Not because he wasn't enough, but because she felt she was forcing him to stand alone. Cain turned the moment she moved. His face changed. "Nalaya." "Cain." "I'm all right," she whispered, though her voice thinned to breaking. "Let's go now." He reached out, but Nalaya didn't take his hand. Not because she didn't want to, but because if she touched him now, she would cry. And she would not let the town see that. She turned and walked away. Cain followed close behind. He said nothing, knowing any word might shatter her. Outside the square, the night wind struck her face, cold but clean. She drew one long breath, only one, before tears broke loose, unstoppable. She turned so Cain wouldn't see, but Cain saw, and for the first time in his life, Cain Mercer felt helpless enough to sink to his knees. He could not shield her from the world, and that was the fear that hollowed him most. They said nothing on the ride back to the ranch, but in that silence, a painful truth grew. If Nalaya stayed beside him, she would keep getting hurt. And Cain feared that someday, she would choose to leave to save herself. The road from Gold Creek to the ranch stretched pale under a cold silver moon. The wagon wheels pressed through half-melted snow, leaving long tracks like the tired breath of a day far too heavy with pain. Neither of them spoke. Cain held the reins, moonlight drawing a sharp line along his cheekbone. Nalaya sat beside him, hands folded in her lap, trying to still their trembling, not from cold, but from the cruel words still lodged in her heart, like steel thorns. With each passing minute, one thought pressed deeper into her mind. Cain must regret everything. Regret bringing her into town. Regret placing her in the center of gossip. regret being tied to someone like her. The thought tightened her throat. She stared straight ahead, afraid that if she looked at Cain, she would see the regret she had no strength left to bear. Night wind swept across the fields, cedar mixing with the scent of early spring grass. Silence stretched long, as if meant to drown her in shame and humiliation. Then, unexpectedly, Cain pulled the reins. The horse stopped in the middle of the road. No town behind them, no eyes watching, only white fields and a low, quiet moon. Nalaya turned to him, startled. "Cain? Why stop?" He didn't answer right away. He stepped down, then came around to her side. In the moonlight, his face held a strong, sorrowed beauty, steady but cracked where he'd tried to hide it. He reached up a hand. "Come down. I need to talk to you." His voice was low, rough, as if something heavy was holding him from inside. Nalaya placed her hand in his. He helped her down, his grip circling her wrist a moment longer than necessary, as if afraid letting go meant losing her. When her feet touched the dew-soaked ground, Cain stepped back, then stopped again, unable to speak. Wind lifted her long, dark curls, and when she looked up at him, Cain's head lowered slightly, as if he felt unworthy of her gaze. "Cain?" she murmured. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat. When he opened them, his voice broke softly. "I'm sorry." A simple apology that could not hide the pain braced in his chest. "I'm sorry for what you faced today." His voice turned hoarse. "I should have—" "Cain," Nalaya cut in, trying to steady her voice. "You didn't do anything wrong." "No." He shook his head. "I was wrong to think my presence was enough to shield you. I can't fight a whole town, and because of that, you were hurt." Her throat tightened. The night wind wasn't as cold as the honesty in his words. Cain looked down, hands curling slightly as if wrestling with himself. "When those words were thrown at you today," he paused, "I wanted to strike every last one of them, but I didn't. I couldn't. I was useless, and I hated it." Nalaya stepped closer. Just one step, enough for their breaths to reach each other. He looked at her again, gray-blue eyes carrying something deeper than regret. "I thought, after what happened in the square, you'd see me differently." His voice scraped low. "I thought you'd leave the ranch. Leave me." The last words barely made it out. Nalaya drew a breath. "Cain, why would I leave you?" He held her eyes for a long, long moment. Then he spoke, without hesitation, without searching, as if the words had lived in him for months. "Because I love you." Nalaya went still. Cain stepped closer. "I love you since that blizzard night." His voice trembled just slightly. "You opened your eyes, tried to sit up even when you didn't know where you were, and I knew I couldn't let you slip out of my life." The wind stopped. The horse stilled. Only her heartbeat pounded hard enough to echo. Cain lifted a hand, slowly, gently, and set his palm against her cheek. "Nalaya, you're the best thing I've ever had." Tears fell down her face, not from hurt, but because for the first time she felt seen, chosen, loved, entirely. She covered his hand with hers, pressing it closer to her skin. "Cain," she whispered, "I love you too." He froze. Then, with a trembling breath, Cain leaned in. The second kiss was nothing like the first. It was deeper, more certain. not born of impulse, but of two people who had passed through pain and still chose each other. When their lips met, every cruel word in town faded like mist. It wasn't hurried, it wasn't blazing, it was tender, long, warm, like a promise exchanged beneath a moon that knew too much. When they parted, Nalaya rested her forehead against Cain's chest, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, as if afraid the night wind might steal her. "Don't leave me," he breathed into her hair. "No," she answered. "Not as long as choosing you is still mine to make." The Colorado Valley held its silence, still as a vow. The morning after that moonlit night, something unusual happened in Gold Creek. The story did not spread the way folks expected. No one saw Cain or Nalaya slip away into the dark. No one saw them avoiding each other. Instead, they appeared together in the square before the day had even warmed. Cain walked beside Nalaya, not touching her hand, not showing off, but standing close enough that anyone looking would understand. This was their choice, not scandal, not confusion. It quieted some people. Mr. Caldwell nodded to Cain, and then to Nalaya. Mrs. Murray pulled Nalaya into a tight hug, whispering, "You're strong, child. Don't let anyone shake you." A few others began to see the truth. Gossip no longer carried enough weight to break what they had built since winter. Not all the town changed, but part of it turned, and that gave Nalaya room to breathe. Cain didn't speak of the night before right away. He let the silence walk with them through the morning. Not an awkward silence, but the kind shared by two people listening to the earth beneath their feet, to a new warmth settling between them. Back at the ranch, Nalaya set the basket of eggs on the table and tapped it lightly to get Cain's attention. "Cain," she said. He stood leaning against the counter, those gray-blue eyes no longer hiding what he had spoken the night before. They had softened, deepened, as if he saw her completely. "I want to talk about last night," she said. Cain took a step toward her, not hurried but close enough to tighten her breath. "Last night," he said quietly, "is not something I intend to take back." Nalaya lowered her eyes. "But the town?" "Gold Creek doesn't get to decide for me," Cain said, slow and steady as Colorado stone. "And it has no right to decide for you." A small breath slipped from Nalaya, like someone pulled from deep water. "Cain, if we make this public, it won't be easy." "It won't," he agreed. "But I want it. Unless you, I want it too." The words came so quickly she startled herself. Cain looked at her, and his smile, long, warm, like spring sun swafting over thawing snow, was the first she had seen of its kind on him. "Then from today," Cain said, "we stop hiding." He held out a hand, not touching her, just offering it. A promise, an invitation. Nalaya placed her hand in his. No kiss, no embrace. Just that single hold was enough to mark their path, no matter how many eyes waited ahead. News of their choice spread fast, but not with the same venom as before. Part of the town, those who saw Nalaya work each day, those who noticed Cain soften in her presence, began to understand. "Cain Mercer's always been a decent man," Mr. Caldwell said. "If he chooses someone, it's because her heart's worth choosing." Others, even if not fully convinced, eased their harsh looks. That spring, Gold Creek did not transform entirely, but it softened. And in Massen, a place once cut raw by mountain wind, that softening was a kind of miracle. One evening near sundown, Cain led Nalaya to a small valley behind the ranch. where he used to watch the cattle when he was young. He said nothing on the walk, only held her hand. Wind moved through the young branches, carrying the scent of earth waking after winter. "Nalaya," he said, stopping beneath a birch tree. She turned, sunset casting a warm sheen over her skin. Cain looked at her a long moment, as if searching for the truest words among all the others. "You know how I grew up," he began. "My father taught me this. If you want something worth having, stand in front of it and speak. Don't whisper. Don't hide behind anyone." He took a slow breath. "I want to ask you to marry me." Nalaya startled, her heartbeat ringing in her ears. "Cain." He didn't kneel, not from lack of respect, but because the way he looked at her already carried the weight of a vow. "But," Cain continued, voice easing, "I won't rush it. I'll do it right. With a minister, with witnesses, with a life steady enough that you feel cherished, not needed out of loneliness." He brushed the back of her hand with his fingertips. "You deserve nothing less than absolute kindness." Wind stilled for a moment. So did her heart. Nalaya leaned into him, resting her forehead against his chest. Her voice was soft, but firm with a heart that no longer wished to run. "I choose you, Cain. Today, and in the days after." Cain wrapped his arms around her, lightly, as if holding the most fragile, precious thing he had ever known. No music, no flowers, only sunset falling on them like a quiet witness. And in that moment, they laid the first stone of a future, not loud, not perfect, but built on commitment, peace, and the healing they had traveled so far to find together. On the morning of the wedding, the Mercer Valley looked washed clean in early summer light. Dew clung to each blade of grass, shining like tiny pieces of glass. The sky was so clear that even the thin white clouds drifting along the mountainside seemed close enough to touch. No one expected a small ranch wedding to look this beautiful. Nalaya stood in the wooden room Cain had spent an entire week repairing. Not a bridal chamber, but a dressing room prepared just for her. The window was open, letting in the scent of wildflowers and the soft calls of mountain birds. Her simple wedding dress, sewn by Martha Wells, was ivory, with slightly lowered shoulders and soft fabric that held her slender frame without show. The skirt's lace was hand-woven by the women of Gold Creek, a quiet gesture of respect. She touched the hem and drew a steady breath. This day once seemed impossible. Outside, Cain walked the yard checking every detail, but truthfully, he didn't need to. Townsfolk who had stood by them had come early to help decorate. Wild purple flowers tied along the fence, white cloth draped from the eaves, a small birch arch dressed with mountain daisies, gathered by the children from the back field. The ranch had never looked finer, but all of it dimmed when Cain turned and saw Nalaya step onto the porch. He stopped, completely stopped. Sunlight lit her face, turning her brown eyes deep as honey. The white dress lay against her smooth caramel skin, like light meant for her alone. Cain didn't move toward her at once. He needed a breath. Maybe two. Then he exhaled, long, slow, as if he had finally found something he'd been missing too long. "You're beautiful," he said it quietly, just for her. "Beautiful enough I'm not sure I can stand steady." Nalaya flushed, but didn't look away. She looked straight at him, seeing not only admiration, but gratitude, humility, and a reverence he couldn't hide. It made her heart tremble, not from nerves, but from being seen for who she truly was. Are you ready? She asked softly. Cain held out his hand, broad, warm, slightly shaking. I've been ready for a long time. The ceremony was held in the ranch yard beneath a tall birch. Reverend Howard presided, usually grumbling about the town's age gaps, but today standing with a gentle smile. 24 people circled around, few, but each one someone who had chosen to stand with him when the town was divided. Folks who had sent quiet encouragement, who had shielded them from harsh talk when gossip weighed heaviest. As Nalaya and Cain stepped beneath the flowered arch, wind lifted purple petals into her hair. Cain never looked away, as if every moment of his life had led to this one. The minister opened his worn Bible, though the words were mere formality. What mattered was the moment Cain turned to face Nalaya. No ornate promises, no grand speeches. Just his voice low, true. Nalaya, I promise to stand by you, to be kind to you, to choose you every day, even on the hardest days. I can't promise life will be easy, but I promise my life will be a place where you are safe. Nalaya felt her throat burn. She held his hand, her own trembling as she offered her vow. Cain, I promise to walk with you, winter or summer. I promise to keep this home warm, to keep my heart open to you, and to keep the truth that you are the one who made me feel worthy of being loved. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Not even the wind seemed willing to break the moment. The Reverend smiled. I declare you husband and wife. Cain lifted both hands to her face, touching her with the care of someone guarding something precious. Their kiss was not long or forceful, just a quiet meeting of two people who could finally stand openly together, without fear. Applause rose, not loud, but heartfelt. And Nalaya, for the first time in her life, felt peace. Not from stubbornness or escape, but from belonging exactly where she was meant to be. After the ceremony, Cain set his coat around her shoulders as the afternoon wind cooled. The simple gesture brought a smile to her lips. Mrs. Mercer, he murmured. Nalaya leaned into him. My husband. No church bells, no grand feast. Just that evening, in the Colorado Valley, they stepped into a new chapter. Not dazzling, but steady, warm, a true home carved from all the storms they had endured. The years passed like the creek running along the Mercer hillside. Slow, patient, quiet, but steady. The Colorado Valley changed colors with each season. Spring green, summer gold, autumn red, winter white. And through every one of those seasons, the Mercer Ranch grew a little more each year, as if it too had learned how to love. Cain and Nalaya had expanded the horse pens, built another barn, and planted a small apple orchard behind the house. Each spring, when the snow melted, Nalaya pressed fresh strands of purple wildflowers along the fence, brightening the valley like a soft scarf laid across the mountainside. And each time Cain walked past those blossoms, he smiled, that rare smile that only began appearing after Nalaya came into his life. Their two children grew faster than a summer season. The first, a girl with Nalaya's deep brown eyes and Cain's quiet smile. The second, a boy, restless and loud, chasing his father, his mother, and even the cattle as if all of them were kin. The house was always filled with the sound of small feet on wooden floors, children's laughter, and Nalaya calling them in to wash before supper. In the midst of it all, Cain would stand on the porch and watch his family with the awed certainty of a man who had learned that peace does not arrive on its own. It is built, piece by piece, with heart and hands. Nalaya became the spirit of the ranch in the gentlest way. She was never loud, never commanding. She simply existed where she was needed, and the whole home moved with her rhythm. When she laughed, the children laughed. When her hand rested on Cain's shoulder after a long day, the weight in him eased, and Cain became the quiet anchor. The man who once kept everything inside now stood each morning in the ranch yard, making sure his home was strong enough to meet the winter. He wasn't loud, wasn't proud. He was simply steady, dependable, always there. There were small moments, Cain brushing a stray blade of grass from Nalaya's hair, or Nalaya setting a cup of coffee beside him as he shaped wood. That became the threads holding their love firm. Colorado nights turned cold earlier than most places. During their 6th winter as husband and wife, when the children were asleep and the only sound in the house was the crack of firewood, Nalaya stepped out onto the porch. The night wind carried the scent of coming snow. Moonlight climbed over the ridge, lighting the thin line of frost already forming on the ground. Cain came out quietly and laid a scarf over her shoulders. "Thinking of old times?" he asked, brushing a hand along her back. She nodded. "Some nights. The wind feels just like the night you found me in the snow." Cain looked toward the valley, toward the place where he had lifted her onto his horse, her body cold and breath faint. "That night," he said, voice low, "I thought I was saving someone. Turned out, I was saving my own life." Nalaya leaned into him. The wind was sharp, but Cain's hand at her waist made it feel distant. "Cold?" he asked. "No," she murmured, "not with you." Cain didn't answer. He didn't need to. He only drew her closer, letting her breath settle against him, letting his heartbeat speak for the both of them. They stood there a long while, watching the land stretch out, listening to the wind sweep across the valley, looking at the warm glow of their home. Neither spoke. They didn't need words. They had survived their longest winter to stand here now, together. After a quiet moment, Nalaya turned to him, her eyes lit softly beneath the moon. "Cain," she said, "do you ever think all of this began with one night in a snowstorm?" Cain studied her, then glanced at the last dried petals of purple wildflowers along the fence. "The coldest nights," he said, steady and slow, "are sometimes the ones that lead you home." Nalaya smiled, calm as a windless lake, and beneath the Colorado night, with frost gathering around them, they held hands, not tightly, not to prove anything, just in the simple, natural way life had prepared them for all along. Theirs was no fairy tale, but it was a lasting love, built on kindness, patience, and a winter night that brought two lost souls home. If this story brings back an old memory, a hand once held, a promise once kept, feel free to share it below. And if you found this tale beautiful, we invite you to like and subscribe, so each week we can sit together again and listen to another love story, gentle and steadfast, like the years that have passed through your own life.